Over the past couple of months, especially after the attacks on soldiers in Quebec and Ottawa, we've been hearing a lot about the issue of radicalization. In a previous show, we discussed how we can play a proactive role in preventing young people from being radicalized. But what happens when someone does become radicalized and ends up in prison as a result? Today, we talk to Imam Yasin Dwyer, former chaplain with the Correctional Service of Canada. Imam Yasin has worked with inmates convicted of terrorism offences, helping them turn away from radicalism. He'll tell us about his experiences and what needs to be done in Canada's prisons to combat radicalization. Welcome to the show, Imam Yasin.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to get right into it. Rumor has it that you recently resigned from your post as a chaplain with Correctional Services of Canada. So I was wondering if you could indulge our viewers a little bit on what the backstory was on that.
Well, there were a variety of reasons. I've been working as a chaplain with the Correctional Service of Canada for the past 10 to 11 years, and there have been a series of changes that have taken place within chaplaincy that I thought perhaps were not in the interest of providing professional chaplaincy care. And I decided, along with my family, my loved ones, and some other elders within my life, that it was time to move on. I think that service to offenders within chaplaincy are incredibly important. And I felt that perhaps with the new model, with the privatizing of chaplaincy services, or removing the control of providing chaplaincy service from the religious community, was actually detrimental to chaplaincy professionalism. And I thought that perhaps it was time to move on, that maybe I could do a better job as a chaplain, or doing the work of a chaplain outside of this particular privatized model that was implemented by the government a few years ago.
So what is this model? You talked a little bit about, the programming now is being compromised. So what did you do? What were examples of some of the programming that you did? And as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, but you did work a lot with inmates who were quote unquote radicalized. So if you can comment a little bit about on that.
Yes, well, firstly, all chaplains before this new privatized model came about worked for their faith community. Their faith community was given a contract to provide religious and spiritual services to offenders of any given religious community or religious group. So I myself worked under contract with the Islam Care Center based in Ottawa, Ontario, and we were ultimately responsible for projecting Islam, projecting the best of our tradition to Muslim offenders who were in federal prisons in the Ontario region. So what happened with the privatized model is the responsibility, the sense of accountability was really taken away from the community and placed in the hands of a private company that perhaps didn't have a high degree of sensitivity to the unique needs that Muslim offenders may have. So with the whole issue of dealing with radicalized offenders, or those offenders who were convicted through Canada's anti-terrorist legislation, it created a very deep issue for us to deal with, because we had a handful of offenders who were convicted of offenses that were related to religion, right?
And is this tie into the conversation of radicalization when you talk about religion, or are we talking about something separate?
Well, the handful of offenders that we were working with were convicted of terrorist offenses that seemed to relate to a misunderstanding or a misuse of religion. So therefore, as chaplains, we were looked upon, as Muslim chaplains, we were looked upon as authorities in how to deal with these particular offenders. So the model that we had today really didn't offer the resources to be able to deal with that effectively and with religious and spiritual authority.
So what did that model look like when you were working with inmates that were quote unquote radicalized? What did you do with your colleagues in terms of programming to help address that issue?
Well, primarily the programming, again, was not particularly supported by those within government circles. It was something that we had to really improvise. We were tasked with this issue of dealing with offenders who were radicalized, but we were given a very limited amount of resources to actually do that effectively.
And when did this happen? Recently, or in light of the recent instances that happened in Ottawa or Quebec, or is this something that you guys had started a while back?
This was something that started a while back. We did have a few very high-profile cases that took place in Toronto. Many of these individuals were incarcerated and actually under our pastoral care. So what we had to do is we had to be very intentional about actually providing these offenders with some sort of a program that spoke to their offense. Now, the issue of radicalization can be sometimes very problematic concerning how we define the terms. As Muslims, we're very concerned with how we define certain things. And I discovered in dealing with many of these offenders that perhaps the idea of looking at their offense through the lens of ideology wasn't completely accurate. That there were certain psychological factors that actually played a big role. Of course, how the primary texts of our religion are read can sometimes feed into some psychological inclination that someone may have to begin with. So all of these things were a part of the discussion that we had and a part of helping us, informing us concerning how to form some sort of an effective program, albeit informal, to actually deal with these particular offenses.
So I'm glad you brought up the programming comment, because I was doing some research and stalking on you right before the show. Okay. And one of the things that I found was in Denmark, they are taking a very soft approach. So what they're doing with their inmates who are, or people who are convicted of radicalization, is they're taking it as more of a, like a health focus, like a mental health focus. So they're providing them with counseling, support. They're bringing the entire community together. So not just the police force, but the schools, chaplaincy programs, what have you, and bringing them all together. And one example that I particularly read about in Denmark was one particular person who was radicalized. They brought them back, provided very welcoming support, so much so to the point where they even helped these young people find jobs and sort of reintegrate themselves within the community. So that's one approach that we're hearing about, but then obviously there are a lot of critics who, counter-argue that and say, well, they're creating a lot of issues, so maybe we should just lock them up and throw away the key. And one example, not that I'm saying Canada does this, but an approach that Canada has taken is the tough on crime agenda. So what are your perspectives on that in terms of dealing with this issue? Well,
there has to be a balance, and we should be tough on crime, but we also should be tough on the causes of crime. So I would be very interested in studying the Danish model, because they obviously have taken a very balanced approach. They've taken an approach that is in the interest of public safety. I would say that that is really the ultimate goal. From a religious perspective, a spiritual perspective, what we have to do is we have to make sure that our community is respecting the primary texts of our faith. We have to make sure that we don't read the primary text of our faith like we're reading the newspaper.
So when you say the community, are you talking about just Muslims, or are you talking about broadly, like the broader community?
The Muslim community in particular, because we need to recognize that if there are certain readings or certain inclinations or certain assumptions that are being made about our scripture, or certain assumptions that are being made to justify violence in the name of religion, we have to speak to that with authority and make sure that we have elders within our community who are very well versed in not only the texts of the primary sources, but also the context of those primary sources. We need those people to really speak up and be able to speak with authority to this issue. There's a saying in the Caribbean, where I'm from, in Jamaica. They say that the saying is, new broom sweep clean, but whole broom no decana. So basically we need We need some of the old brooms in our community to actually speak with authority to those who may have certain inclinations to vigilantism or inclinations to anarchism, that we have to recognize that that's something that really is not a part of our rich tradition and heritage. There must be a balance as well. And although there is a lot of fear in the wider community, we have to make sure that we're not overwhelmed or consumed by fear. We have to look for very practical, intelligent, and wise solutions to this phenomenon, or else what will happen is that we may actually be a part of the problem rather than the solution.
So what are some examples of what is that practical solution that we can start to implement, not just within the community leaders, but as a broader community? And the other question that I have for you is, what role do non-Muslims have to play in this? Do they have a role?
Well, I would say that we have to, again, look at context. And fear can be very dangerous. And fear can cause people to lose their sense of balance or their sense of discernment when it comes to particular difficult issues that are happening in their community, right? So what I would say is that for the wider community, we have to ask the question, why? Why is this phenomenon taking place? Why do people choose violence as a means of solving any particular problem, not just political problems? Why? I think every Canadian citizen should be interested in the inclination for many to resort to violence to solve particular problems. Now, there's a great book by Steven Pinkers about violence. He's a psychologist from Harvard University. I believe he's Canadian as well. And he wrote an excellent book about why people are violent. And he came to this very simple conclusion. He said people are violent, or people choose violence, because they feel that they've been wronged. That's generally why people are violent, outside of the mental health dimension to that question. But people feel that they have been wronged. People feel that they have been the victims of some sort of injustice. That's a very serious thing. And I know because of the fear, many people have a difficult time discussing the why. But ultimately, even when the police want to solve a crime, right, or solve an offense, they look for motive. They try to find out, why did this happen, or what is the psychology of the one who perpetrated the crime, right? We should engage ourselves in a very similar process to ask why, because then we won't actually have a knee-jerk reaction to these things. We'll actually have a reaction that is intelligent and a reaction that actually works in the interest of public safety.
So, Imam Yasin, I want to wrap up by just asking you, in the Ottawa Citizen article that I was reading about you, at the end it said, in your role as the prison chaplain, it ended off saying, I resigned, I did not quit. And I thought that was very powerful, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that.
Well, I'll briefly mention I did not resign without gaining permission from many of the offenders that I've worked with over these years, and it was very hard to leave. And surprisingly, there were a lot of tears, which made it very, very difficult for me to leave. So I was given permission by the brothers and sisters that I've worked with for so long
and
to
you
resign.
went out and got permission from every single one of them?
I can't say that I got permission from every single one, but I met with groups.
Okay.
The only condition that was given to me was that I would not leave them. I would not forget them. I would not give up on them. So I promised them that I would make sure that I continued this work, I would not forget them, and I would, most importantly, keep them in my prayers. But of course, I would return. So therefore, I did resign. I did not quit. This is work that you cannot quit as a matter of principle, as a matter of faithfulness. This is a work that we cannot quit. We have to always be mindful that the walls that surround these prisons are really are really imaginary, because those who are incarcerated are a part of our community. So we do have responsibilities to make sure that they are granted access to those spiritual resources that will help them to gain spiritual and religious completeness.
That's a very powerful message, and I think we don't hear it often, so thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you.